Hi, my name is Sandesh Kadur, Senior Fellow of the International League of Conservation Photographers, or ILCP for short. As ILCP celebrates its 15th anniversary this year, we are delighted to be the official conservation photography partner of this year's virtual Wildscreen Festival. The 2020 edition of Wildscreen is like none other in its 38-year-long history. This is going to be the largest and most accessible Wildscreen festival to date. Wildscreen was founded in 1982, and so for nearly 4 decades, it's been the place for filmmakers and storytellers to come together, meet, exchange ideas, and inspire each other to do better, to care, and educate, and ultimately help protect the planet. That's our only home. I'm delighted this evening to be introducing 2 old friends, or rather 2 friends who have known each other for a long time, Tom Mangelsen and Jane Goodall. Tom is an artist and conservationist and a founding fellow of the International League of Conservation Photographers, and as Jane describes him, an American treasure. And Jane Goodall, of course, needs no introduction. She is a legendary scientist, conservationist, humanitarian, whose groundbreaking work and discoveries shaped our understanding of what it is to be human. Welcome, Tom. Welcome, Jane. Tom, you told us about the time that you first met Jane at the University of Colorado, and I'd love to hear that story again.
Yes, I first met Jane in the late 90s at the University of Colorado. She was giving a talk and getting a Lifetime Achievement Award. And I went to the after party and shook Jane's hand and told her how much I appreciated her work and how she's changed a lot of lives, including mine. And she signed the book, and that was the last time I saw her. And then 4 years later, she came to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where I live, and she was staying with mutual friends, and Addie and Ted Donnan, and Addie called me up and asked if I would introduce Jane at the National Wildlife Art Museum. And I said, of course, it would be a great honor, but I was pretty intimidated. And Jane's work was very inspiring to me for many years. And her late husband, Hugo van Lawijk, I was totally enthralled with his stills and his books that he's done with Jane, and of course the films that he did with Jane. It was easy for me to introduce Jane in a way because I had this background of loving both of them, and in a way of what they were doing and writing and living in Africa, and sort of a dream come true that I would get to actually meet Jane. So I was very fortunate and lucky to do that. We talked about cranes for a minute, and she said, I heard about this crane migration in Nebraska. Do you know anything about that? And I said, well, matter of fact, I do. I did 3 films on cranes, one for National Geographic called Flight of the Whooping Crane in like 1984, and one on sandhill cranes called Cranes of the Great Wind for PBS Nature and BBC Natural World. So, and I said, besides that, I have a cabin on the Platte River right in the middle of the migration of these 600,000 cranes and maybe 10 million ducks and geese. And I said, what are you doing in March? She said, I'm coming with you to see the cranes. And that was really the beginning of a very long friendship. She came out to see the cranes, and she's been coming out for the last 19 years. This year she missed it because of the COVID. But it's always been our annual migration to get together at my cabin in Nebraska and see the cranes and all the other wildlife that's there. But it really solidified our friendship, and Jane's got a respite with her 300 days of travel around the world. And we would spend 2 or 3 weeks there, sometimes less. And she would write her books and make the fires. And I remember Jane coming down there when we went for a walk. She had a whole armload of trash that had floated down the river. And here's Jane Goodall picking up trash. And she wasn't too good to pick up trash. And so the cabin is now clean the river is clean of trash. But we've had a lot of great experiences here with snow geese and the cranes, of course. And I've been very, very fortunate to have met Jane, and it's sort of very serendipitous that I got to introduce her. And she told me just make it really short. I'll tell my own story. So it wasn't difficult. And Hugo van Lawick, I could talk about because of my affection for his photography and filmmaking. But anyway, it's been that's how it started. And we'll see you, Jane, in Nebraska in the spring.
So, Jane, I just very quickly heard something you said recently on a talk. You said that you went to Africa as a scientist and you left as an activist. So, how do you use the power of visual media for your activism, and how effective is it to get your message and your point heard?
Okay, well, first of all, I have to correct you. I did not go to Africa as a scientist. I hadn't even been to college. I went because my dream from the age of 10 was to go to Africa, live with wild animals, and write books about them. Girls weren't scientists back then. You said old friends. Well, I'm nearly 87, so you could say I'm old as well as a friend. Anyway, I got lucky. I met the famous Louis Leakey, and he realized I was passionate, and he gave me this opportunity to go and study chimpanzees. So when I first began telling people what I'd learned, how like us chimps are, that they use and make tools and things like that, the scientific community pushed back. Why should we believe her? She's just a young girl. She hasn't even been to college. But then, fortunately, because of seeing the tool using and tool making by one chimpanzee whom I named David Greybeard, the National Geographic got involved. And of course, they're known for their photographs and their documentaries. So not only did they agree to continue funding the research after the first 6-month grant from a philanthropist when that ran out, but they also sent Hugo to film and photograph the chimps. So when I then began sending the same meticulous observations, but illustrated with Hugo's stills, and then the film that he was making, scientists had to believe what I was saying. They couldn't dispute the evidence that was on film. So it was the National Geographic articles with the photographs, and it was the Hugo's documentaries that first took the story of Jane and the chimpanzees around the world, eventually around the world. And so it made an enormous difference in my ability to continue studying those chimpanzees. And this is the 60th year. We had our 60th anniversary in July this year of the first day I arrived in Gombe, age 26, in 1960. And I would say that since then, the changes, and Tom will know this, but when Hugo first came, he had a Bolex, and it was one of those things where you threaded celluloid film through all the sprockets, and if you got one hair in the gate where the film had to go out, that ruined the entire roll. And you had to put a black bag over your head to load it so the light didn't get in. It was so painstaking. And you had to carry a heavy wooden tripod and this heavy old Bolex. And since that time, the changes in the technology of filmmaking and photography have changed so much. And I remember, Tom, you saying to me at the sort of beginning of this digital age, I'm not going that way. I'm going to go. You were still loading up the film. I don't know if you remember that, but I remember it very well. And now I cannot imagine you wanting to go back to that film because you lose so much because, you're like, I remember Hugo, he's coming, he's got the there were two kinds of rolls. There was one short one, and then there was a 400 spool. And if he was near the end, and there was, say, 1 minute left, do I keep it to film? But then something amazing might happen, and I'll only have 1 minute, and then it's going to take me 10 minutes to put the next roll in. So do I just use it up and put a new one in case something happens? It was a nightmare, really. Very hard work.
I remember those days.
And I remember
I had a Bolex, and I did that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I remember your sitting watching the cranes with you, and there was some film person there. I can't remember who it was. And I think it was Making Jane's Journey. And we were watching the cranes, and there's click, 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 click. I said, Tom, for pity's sake, get a quieter camera. The main thing about the cranes is the sound they make. Yes, it's beautiful when they come in against the sunset, but it's the calling of the crane. That was what I first read about in an airline magazine. That's what attracted me to come. And it is the sound of their calling is amazing and haunting. And here's this click, 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 click. Digital. You can do as much as you like.
I know that was on the 60 Minutes piece with Anderson Cooper, and that was the most important moment, I think, when I talked to friends that watched it. They said that part where Jane said, "Can't you just get a new camera that doesn't make noise?" And everybody laughed, and I said, "I'll do that next year." So I'm getting a silent movie camera and a still camera next year for you, just for you.
But Tom, the other thing about moving to digital, to get that one moment, the moment, it's so much easier, isn't it? When you can just shoot, instead of having to wait and hope you get the right moment because you've only got 4 shots left on your camera. I mean, it must have made all the difference in the world.
Yeah, it's such an advance and even now you can start recording like a number of seconds before you actually turn the camera on. You can go back to it, so you can get the pre-behavior. So if you're waiting for a bird or an animal to do something, you can just start filming, like you say, you just film it and or videotape it, and it's no loss. Like film, I used to count the dollars going through my roll on my camera, and I thought, oh my God, this is going to cost me a fortune. But now it's so much easier, cheaper, and with the longer lenses, it's remarkable. And films like the David Attenborough's The Planet and all the others have been really incredibly special. Even if it's overdone now compared to 20 years ago, they're totally different with the high definition and 4K or 6K. And it's a whole revolution in filming or video. Yeah.
And of course, the other thing that's changed is what do you call it? Shopping, camera shopping. No, what do you call it when you change the image? Shopping.
Oh, you can. You're talking about post processing and
all the cheating.
Photoshop.
Photoshop. Thank you.
Yeah, Photoshop.
You can Photoshop you can change an image, and one of your most magical pictures for almost everybody is the bear waiting for the salmon, and Catch of the Day it's called, of the salmon jumping into the bear's mouth. And I dislike it because, most people will think it's photoshopped to catch an image like that. I believe you that it wasn't. A lot of people
no,
don't.
It wasn't. It was,
that was camera shot.
Everybody used to say, it was in 1987 when I took that, before Photoshop even existed. But and it's on the wall back behind me there, actually. But I spent a week there just trying to get the shot. I've never seen a picture of a bear with the salmon and immediately going into its mouth. There are thousands and thousands of pictures of bears fishing, but not a head and shoulders of just that. And so, and it was like 2 frames a second, and it was everything was manual, and it was very slow film in those days, in the sense that you couldn't shoot very late in the day or early in the day, and shutter speeds were not that high. It was shot at 1,000th of a second with the 860 millimeter lens. So, that was lucky in many ways, but I did spend my time there, and I just went there for that particular photo.
I know. Well, I learned that from Hugo, about the need to wait and wait and wait and wait and wait and hope that something happened. Well, I learned that about photography. I personally learned it from observing animals. You just have to wait and wait and wait and wait to see what's going to happen. And you learn interesting things. When I was with Hugo on the Serengeti and we were filming innocent killers, one of the animals being filmed was jackal, but he also was filming bat-eared foxes, which I adore. They're one of my favorite animals in the world because somebody gave me a little orphan, which I looked after. He was called Chimba, which means dig in Swahili. And he was one of the most amazing animals I've ever had. But so I've always loved them and watching them in the wild. What I noticed was when a tourist car came up and stopped to get photographs, the foxes, they weren't afraid. They knew cars wouldn't hurt them, but they didn't like it. So what did they do? They curled up and went to sleep. And once the tourists left, they went on doing what they were doing before, playing, catching insects. And you learn a lot of things when you just wait and wait and watch and wait.
Yeah, I think my most important attribute is probably from growing up in Nebraska, hunting with my dad, which I don't hunt anymore. But in those days, we would wait all day or a week maybe for a flock of ducks or geese. And I didn't know any better. I was out there in the duck blind with him since I was 1 year old. And I just learned to watch. And that's how I guess became a good observer, why I fell in love with nature and the river, the Platte River is a huge influence. But the biggest lesson I learned was my dad said, you just need to be patient. And so I didn't know any better. So it's part of what I did. So it served me well in filmmaking and photography. I don't mind waiting because I always see things and just, look and see what might be different next time or next year. Colors are different. The river is lower or higher. All these things that might be, and I dream a lot of what a picture might be, pre-visualize something, and I continue to go back and back and back. I'm not a photographer that goes to one place and then moves on to 20 other places in a year. I continue to stay in a place until I pretty much what I figured got what I could possibly get, and I suppose that's a good attribute, and also people think it's very boring to go with me.
Tom, you said you started off as a hunter, and I know you used to be one of the best to imitate the different sounds to attract the poor birds to be shot. Pass over that darkened part of your life, which I don't like, as you know.
I'm still trying to make up for it.
Wait, I know. So I wanted to ask you, can you actually understand, and seriously in your heart, can you understand somebody who would pay thousands of dollars and go out to shoot a giraffe, to stick the head on your wall, or to shoot the most beautiful elephant with these tusks who's maybe lived 30 years on this planet, or a lion with a beautiful mane just because you want the head on your wall? Can you understand the mentality of those people?
I cannot, Jane. I cannot understand it. And I've thought about it a lot, but trophy hunting in general, I really hate. And for animals like you're speaking of, I never thought that giraffes would be endangered in my lifetime, and they're actually on a threatened species list, as are lions and leopards and pretty much many the African Big Five. But I try to understand, and I know people in Jackson Hole and other places that have whole trophy rooms with hundreds of animals. And you and I were in Dallas with this guy, had a whole wall full of deer heads, and you'd refuse to go into the room, but I had to go see it for myself. And luckily you didn't go in there because I know it would have really affected you. There's a guy here in town who has so many lion heads that half of them are in the garage. He's got like 20 in his house. The whole thing is so disrespectful and so archaic.
Anyway, Tom, the point is, macho, I can kill this big, dangerous animal. But to go, and they say, and you're supposed to do it on foot to make it fair and sporting. very sporting. So I always say to them, yeah, but it's much more sporting, much more brave, much more macho if you go on foot after that animal and take a photograph rather than shoot it, because then you not only have to shoot it with a camera, but you have to get away without being killed yourself. That is much more macho.
Yeah, well, it's a lot more rewarding too, and that animal can still be out there for others to see, and like in the bear situation, 3 or 4 years ago, there was a busload of junior high kids from Olathe, Kansas, and they had been on a trip through South Dakota and Mount Rushmore, Glacier National Park, Yellowstone National Park, and their last stop was in the Tetons. And I was standing on the highway, and they pulled up, and 399 and her 2 cubs were out about 150 yards, and they were so far I didn't even pull up my camera, but I had my binoculars, and these kids pile out, and one of the kids comes up to me, and he has my book, Grizzlies of Pilgrim Creek, and he said, I just brought this book because I was hoping I would see you on the road. Like, well, I'm on the road a lot and in the area a lot, but so I signed a book, and these kids were thrilled to look through my binoculars, and they had scopes and things, and they were just so excited. And the bears looked like dots. Actually, they wasn't a very good sighting. But one of the teachers came up to me, and she says, there were 40 students, and she says, Tom, we have been to Mount Rushmore, we've been to Glacier Park, we've been to Yellowstone Park, and this is the first bear these kids have seen. And we're from Olathe, Kansas, and maybe they will never have another chance in their lives to see another bear, and they'll always remember this experience. And then I think about somebody shooting that bear, put it on a rug or on the wall. One bullet will steal that opportunity, besides being cruel and inhumane to shoot an animal like that.
Speaking to the power of photography and film, that night when we got back to Addie Donna's house after that picnic, you missed out. You missed out the fact that when you went knocking on the door in the dead of night, when the house was pitch dark, that young woman very nearly died of fright. And I said, Tom, how could you do that? You missed that conveniently, probably forgotten it. But anyway, we got back we got back to Addie's house, and yes, we were creeping around like naughty teenagers, getting the video to work so that you could show me at the end of this beautiful day, this awful footage of a female cougar being shot. And the image stayed with me, still with me now, because the person who shot it, she said to me when I was talking to her about it, she said, but looking up in the tree, the dogs were at the bottom of the tree baying. The outfitter had just come with his gun and looked up and said, oh yeah, it's a nice Tom. It wasn't, it was a female. But, and she said, but the cougar was so peaceful up in that tree. And I'd watched that film, and I have never seen, that cat was terrified. She was so frightened. She was trying to be invisible. And she obviously was cramping up. She'd been up there, I don't know how long. And I think one foot was on a thorn or something, and she wanted desperately to move it. It took her about a whole minute to move her foot from here to here because she was trying not to be seen. And this haunted me. And she had a little dribble of saliva from her mouth. And I can still see that now as when you showed me. And that is the power of film. That's why filming and photography is so very, very important, because those pictures tell a story. Those films tell a story. That's why David Attenborough's become so famous. That's why it wasn't me who called you America's treasure, by the way. It was somebody else. I don't know who did. Who called you an American treasure?
Of course, you know that climate change is the biggest threat we have right now in the world. But there's a lot of films been done on it, and we are way behind the mark in trying to change things. The whole western United States is on fire right now. There's huge fires in Australia, and hurricanes about every other week. seas are rising. But we have to get a handle on it. One of the ways, of course, you show through film and video and television documentaries that what the effects that this climate change is having on the Earth, and it's really powerful stuff. And hopefully, it will help change people's minds.
Well, that's one thing I hope will come out of this pandemic, and that is that more and more people will understand that it's our total disrespect of the natural world and animals that increased the likelihood of this pandemic, which the scientists have been predicting for years and years and years. Because it's our disrespect of animals and their habitat that gives these viruses and bacteria an opportunity, an environment in which they can hop from an animal to a person and maybe cause a new disease, as was the case with the COVID-19 virus. So hopefully people will emerge and be fighting for a different relationship with the natural world, a different respect for animals. Because once this pandemic is over, which it will be, we're going to be literally face to face with this much, much greater threat of climate change. And if we go back to business as usual, which some people, some businesses, some governments are dying to do, go back to working for the bottom line and unlimited world economic development, even though there's natural finite resources, then that's going to spell the end of life on Earth as we know it, and that includes us. So we have to change.
Yeah, we sure do. Boy, it's a big mess right now. I don't think the Earth has ever been, certainly in my lifetime, hasn't been in this kind of threatening situation, but it is so scary right now, and it's going to only get worse if we don't pay attention. And these fires in the western United States, if they were in the Rocky Mountains where I live, which it could be at the same time, the big Yellowstone fires. I mean, the whole Midwest, West, and East Coast, for that matter, could be all on fire, and then you have typhoons and hurricanes and tornadoes on top of it. What are we going to do then? It's going to be a disaster.
And for the first time ever last year, there were fires in the Arctic Circle. And, again, photography, film is bringing those things home to people who haven't seen them. So, come back again and again to the power of this film and this film and these still photographs. And now you can have cameras that do lapses over time, so you can see an iceberg melting, or you can see the glaciers on top of the Tetons gradually melting as you take photographs year after year. And, you can just see the change that happens when an area is deforested. So
when I was in Antarctica in South Georgia about 15, 20 years ago, I always go to the same place. It's called Gold Harbor, and there's a huge glacier that's been melting. And in the last time we went there, the sea had risen so much right there, and the glacier had sloughed off so much. We were actually, our ship was on water. What used to be, we were floating in a bay that used to be a glacier. So one day just seeing that's like incredibly amazing that, 20 years ago it was a glacier, and now we're floating on a ship on it.
Yep. I know. It's certainly, I've lived longer than you. And for me, it's the worst time. It's political, social, and environmental, all three gone to pot. And for me, it's the worst time since World War II. Well, I think the message to put out, and it's not just in the US either, it's around the globe, especially to young people of voting age. If you care about the future, if you have understood about climate change and the sixth great extinction of animal and plant species, then before you vote, examine the attitude of the person you're voting for towards climate change and protection of the forests and so forth. Just look at that if you care about your future. And
you always tell me, Jane, when I get kind of down and depressed about the Earth situation or certain issues, which you have to deal with far more than I do. Tom, all we can do is just keep going, keep the fight going, and not give up. And that's what I love about you, is that you don't give up. You're passionate. You're doggedly about any issue that you care about, which is a lot of animals, all kinds of landscapes, and that you're teaching the kids, and that's who we have to count on with your Roots and Shoots program. There are 10,000 organizations now, something like that, around the world, but the kids are what's going to probably...
It's in 66 countries now. And there's groups in all those countries, kindergarten, university, everything in between. And they're not just protesting and marching and things like that. They're taking action. They're planting trees. They're part of this 1 trillion trees in the next 10, 20 years to absorb the right amount of CO2. But even more important is protecting the existing forests and woodlands, because it's going to take time for the trees we plant to grow big enough to absorb the right amount of CO2. So that's
a great initiative.
Yeah.
Well, good on you. That's a great initiative. And I always say that people ask me how they can help or give money. I said, give it to Jane Goodall Institute for, she's doing the best work and in saving the planet with their children, mostly with young kids and older kids. You're teaching them to sustainability and to take care of the earth and do something. So I think that you're the greatest, and I'm not just because you're my friend and you're Jane Goodall, but it's absolutely true.
And it's not just youth. We've got to bring everybody in. We've got to have a different mindset, because there's a window of time, but it's closing. I don't know how long we have left. And that's why I was traveling 300 days a year. Now I'm stuck here, but I'm busier than I've been in my whole life. There's events like this, Zooms and podcasts and webinars and emails and messages to the different 24 Jane Goodall Institutes, messages to the Roots and Shoots groups. My voice is fading. As you know, it helps it to drink whiskey, but I didn't have any whiskey here, so...
Well, I wish it was there. I would pour you one. I'm getting hoarse too, so I'm going to have a whiskey after this. There,
the first thing
whiskey.
that Jane wrote in the book that she presented me was, together, we can save the world. And that word, together, the bringing everyone together, unity is the need of the hour. And that has remained with me all this time. On a story note, now I read this one part, or I was very impacted by Jane's story of her first moment of communication with one of her favorite characters, David Greybeard. And so I'd love to hear that story of your moment of interaction and the power of communication, and that what you felt in that moment.
Well, it was, again, something that I can never forget. And David Greybeard was the first chimpanzee who ever began to lose his fear, because when I first got to Gombe, they'd never seen a white ape before. We are apes. And they all took one look and ran. And it wasn't until towards the end of the 3rd month, and I only had 6 months to go, that this one chimp, David Greybeard, began letting me get a little bit closer, not really close. And on this one day, I saw him using tools and making tools to fish for termites. And gradually, from then on, he let me get closer. And the time came in the 5th month when I was able to actually follow him. And on this one day, I thought I'd lost him. He went through a tangle of thorny vines, and it's easy for a chimp, but much harder for humans with stupid clothes that the thorns can get caught in, and hair and so on. And so I thought, well, never mind, I'll find him another day. And when I eventually got my way through, he was sitting on the ground And looking back, it looked as if he was waiting for me. Whether he was or not, I will never know. But I sat near him on the ground, about probably 5 feet away, 4 feet, something like that. And there was a ripe red palm nut on the ground, which chimps normally love. So as an offering, I picked it up and held it out towards him on my hand. And he turned his face away. And so I put my hand closer, and he reached out, he took my hand, and with one movement, he dropped the nut, but very gently squeezed my fingers. And that's how chimpanzees reassure each other. So in that one moment, the communication, which I believe was a communication that existed before human language, he understood my motive was good, but he simply didn't want that flipping nut. I understood from his gesture that he understood my motive was good, but he didn't want that flipping nut. So we communicated absolutely. And all this time he was looking into my eyes. So I think, in hindsight, I think that was the moment that I made this commitment. I won't let the chimps down. I'm going to find out about them. I'm going to share what I know with the world. And the strange thing was, back in those days, I'm talking about the early 60s, scientists were not supposed to write a popular book. It was all supposed to be kept within the ivory tower. And that's what I learned when I was forced to go to Cambridge University by Louis Leakey. I was told, you shouldn't have given the chimpanzees names. That's not scientific. They should have had numbers. You can't talk about them having personalities or minds or emotions. Those are unique to humans. But I had learned from my dog, Rusty, here he is, he's always with me, that this wasn't true. Of course, animals have personalities, minds, and emotions. So I was able to stand up to those professors. And when Hugo's film came along to give proof to what I was actually saying, they had to start changing. They had to come away from that reductionist way of thinking, which claimed that we humans were absolutely unique and there was an unbridgeable chasm between us and all the other animals. Chimpanzees broke that down. And once it was admitted that chimpanzees biologically, so like us, did have personalities, minds, and emotions, then that opened the field for all these other amazing animals with whom we share the planet. So that now you're a student, you can study animal emotion, you can study animals' personalities. And as for the intelligence, the intellect, the mind, what we're learning is, for some people, mind-boggling. Not to me, but people are so amazed when they realize what octopuses can do. And I know there's this new film, I bet it's being shown in Wildscreen, isn't it, about the man who makes friends with an octopus? Is that being shown? I forget what they call it. But that already...
I think, yes, it's been nominated at Wildscreen. It's called My Octopus Teacher, and I just watched it last night, and it's phenomenal.
Isn't it? And that's going to change people's minds. That film, just as other films and stills have changed people's minds. So Wildscreen is a very important event.
When I was doing more filmmaking than stills, I'd always go to Wildscreen. It happened every 2 years, and I saw so many great films at Wildscreen, and I never have time really when I'm home to watch them on TV. So just set aside a week there, go watch the films, talk to people, see what's going on. It gave me a lot of great ideas and sort of caught me up every year in the filmmaking world. But it was a real special time in my life to go to Wildscreen and meet the people and see what they were showing. That's where I met actually Hugo, and Hugo was staying in the same hotel I was, and at night we'd have a beer together, and I found him so fascinating. I wish I'd met him sooner, and I wish I'd met him in Africa when he was in Tanzania in Dutu when he and Jane were there, and where he did a lot of his filmmaking in the Serengeti.
And from those films, you can see how the Serengeti has changed, how fewer animals there are. I look at those shots that we took back in, I can't remember the year. It's not like that anymore. Serengeti, like everywhere else, it's changed.
Beyond, like, lions are disappeared, a lot fewer lions, a lot fewer elephants. Wild dogs have basically disappeared. And it has changed even the time I've been here. I've been there much longer. My first trip there was in '87, and not near as many of those species around than there used to be. It's sad.
Are those your dogs, Tom? Are those your dogs?
Those are my dogs, ones that you talked about, the rescue dogs that you said I had to get to have company here when I'm by myself, and when they're by themselves, they play with each other, and I want to thank you. They're my best friends now.
Yes, of course.
Two rescues. They were living on the streets of Idaho Falls, and I think they have a better thing out here. I wish I could show you. I'll send you a snippet later. But they're just playing. That's all they do, and it's a great treat for me. And every morning, my dog.
It's Rusty. When if I can, no, I can't see his face. The lights, sort of. But I've had many dogs. But this one, he was sent to teach me about animals. I'm convinced of that. It was quite unique.
Yeah. I know you told a lot of people, including me, that was your first, how you learned about all those things that you already talked about, but animal behavior and joy and sorrow, and dogs can teach us a lot. These two of mine do.
Well, I just have a little bit of a personal question from my little niece, who is, of course, your biggest fan, Jane. And I think she's trying to she's trying to convince her parents to get herself a dog. And I took her through the exhibit in DC, the National Geographic, the Jane Goodall exhibit. And she was just mesmerized by your life story. And one of the questions she had for me, or two questions, was, if Jane wasn't studying chimpanzees, what do you think she would have studied?
Well, the answer to that, no. The answer is I would have studied any animal that was out in the wild. That was what I went to Africa for. Having learned about African animals, well, I would love to have studied elephants. I would love to have studied mongooses, because they're amazing, the banded mongoose. But the animal I did spend time with, which is utterly fascinating, and I would love to have spent much longer, is the hyena, the spotted hyena in Ngorongoro. Amazing, incredible, intelligent, extraordinary animals they are.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. And her next question was, what book or film would you recommend for her? She's about 10 years old.
10? Well, if she hasn't, I would recommend In the Shadow of Man, which is the first book I wrote about the chimpanzees. But that one, I'm reading it, and it's being, photographs are being added to it. The first chapter is already out there online. So she could start off watching that. It's going to be about a chapter a month, I think. I've read it all, but they're, getting the photographs just right. So that will bring it alive for her to have these photographs in the book. Photographs, some of them never been seen before. It's called In the Shadow of Man. And the other one, which is out there, I think it's on Amazon or Netflix or something, is My Life with the Chimpanzees, which was actually written for someone her age. And this, again, is read by me. I think you have to pay for it, but I don't think it's very much money. It's been every single sound from Gombe has been added into the reading. They even got my mother speaking. They got Hugo speaking. They got Leaky speaking. Completely amazing.
I think your daughter Sandesh could spend the rest of her life probably reading all the books that Jane has done. I looked at the list the other day, and I don't know how many books are there, Jane, 30 or something, or
I don't know.
A lot of books, yeah. But all
Not
of them are
so
really
many.
great.
Not so many of the sort of really significant ones, the ones that take a while, like Shadow of Man, its sequel, Through a Window, then Reason for Hope, Harvest for Hope, Hope for Animals, Seeds of Hope, All Hope, Hope, Hope.
So, in the end, I mean, what is our ultimate message and what is our hopeful message post pandemic? I know you said that I hope things don't go back to the normal that we were used to. What is your message, and how shall we go about this new normal that we're about to get into?
Okay, you go first, Tom.
Oh, Jane, that's a tough question. We have to get out of this new normal. First of all, we need to do all of the things that the scientists and the doctors recommend. If obviously if everybody's heard it, wear a mask, social distancing, avoid big crowds, and be really careful. And people who don't wear masks, I'm afraid, they've been brainwashed by the Trump administration, and it's never going to end if they continue down this road. And people are going to be dying for many more years if they don't pay attention. It's just unfortunate that we don't have a populace that recognizes sort of BS when they hear people talking about need to wear a mask, you can have a big party and all this stuff. There's enough proof that people get massive numbers of people getting sick and dying. And so we need to get it under control before you even think about a new normal, because this certainly isn't normal, and new normal is not very good right now.
All right, well then I'll give my message, which is that when we come through this pandemic, which we will, even if it's a gradual building up of resistance because so many people get sick, which does happen. I mean, the flu comes back every year. There has to be a new vaccine every year. And this is another coronavirus, so it'll probably always be with us. But how do we change people's minds so that they embrace this idea? We must have a different relationship with the natural world. We've got to stop thinking that success is tied up with making money, acquiring fame, getting stuff and more stuff and more stuff. We've got to realize that we'll never save the planet unless we can alleviate poverty, because poor people will go on destroying the environment to try and grow food to feed their families, fishing to feed their families, even if the fish are endangered. And we have to realize that right now on this planet, there are 7.2 billion people. And in 2050, it's estimated there will be 9.7 billion people. And already we're using up the natural resources of the planet, which are finite, faster than nature can replenish them. And as people come out of poverty, they're wanting to emulate the unsustainable lifestyle of the rest of us. We've got to change the mindset of those who have. We've got to help those who have not able to live a life where they have enough for a decent life. We've got to think about what's going to happen if there are 9.7 billion people. And the way that I'm working at it is telling stories about what's happening. In Africa, the Jane Goodall Institute is working to alleviate poverty by finding other ways of people to live without destroying the habitat. And again, it's photography that shows the difference from 10 years ago to now, because the forests are coming back. because the people understand they need the forest for themselves and not just wildlife. And I'm working with young people all the time, growing this Roots and Shoots program further and further and further, because the young people, they choose their project. And your daughter can join Roots and Shoots. Help her get a group going in her school. All it is choose projects to help people, to help animals, to help the environment, because it's all intertwined. And these young people are learning to respect nature and respect animals. You don't have to teach them. When they get together and discuss these things, they inspire each other. And they are changing the world as we speak. They're the ones who are going to move us into this post-pandemic new normal. And if we go back to the old normal, that will be the end. So we have to stop it.
There's only one Jane Goodall, and she carries on and inspires so many people, including myself, obviously, that I've been so fortunate and blessed to have met Jane and become friends all these years. And it helps me carry on. And I just want to thank you, Jane, for all of that, the inspiration.
Well,
I really appreciate it.
There's only one Tom. And how many people have been inspired by your photographs? Millions of them. So, as you said, it's when we get together that we can change the world. We have to get together, and we have to remember that each one of us makes an impact every single day, and we get to choose what sort of impact we make. And we can choose what to buy, what to wear, what to eat. We can learn about how our behavior affects future generations and the impact we make on the environment and on each other every single day. So we as individuals matter, we have a role to play, and let's make ethical decisions every day.
So thank you, Tom. Thank you, Jane, for being with us this evening at the 2020 Wildscreen virtual event. And I look forward to getting into the new normal. Thank you both.
Thank you too. Thank you, Tom.